on your Starfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. I'm Alexander Agunas, No Directions Everyman Gamer, and I'm joined, as always, with two of the most intrepid Starfinders on this side of the galaxy.
Hi, I'm James. I used to write Code Switch.
Hi, I'm Dustin. I write things.
And today we have a very special guest, as was foretold in our last installment. We're here with, oh my gosh, I'm going to mess up your title. I'm not going to mess up your title. Starfinder Senior Developer, John Compton. Yeah.
That sounds right. There we go. Whee!
I'm sorry. I hope I gave you a promotion that you deserve.
I mean, you'd have to be sharing that in front of other folks too.
That's fair. So welcome to the show once more, John. We love having you, and we're very thankful that you're stopping on by to spill the beans on Drift Crisis with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fun book.
Yeah,
and I heard that folks here basically got to take a look at it a week or two ago.
We did. 2 weeks ago. Well, actually about a month ago, we reviewed the precog, and as part of tapping into the forces of the future, we were gifted with a otherworldly insight of a book that's yet to come, The Drift Crisis. So we just naturally needed to warn everybody about it, and so that's what we did on our last episode. But now it seems like we're here with one of the architects of the whole thing. So I guess that's where we're gonna head from here. Tell us what it's like to cause catastrophes.
Yeah, so the Drift Crisis kind of came from a different place than a lot of our other books, and like you've already gone over how the format is a
Beautiful.
creature of its own, entirely different creature, really. So we've had things where it's like, okay, let's choose a theme, like Tech Revolution, like Galactic Magic, where it's like, okay, we clearly have something to consolidate around, and we can kind of just spin off of. This is going to be magical stuff. Cool. We have the occasional character operations manual where it's just player option, alien archives, things like that. But one of the things that we basically had a chance, now that we've been doing Starfinder for a couple of years, of looking back and asking ourselves, what are some of the implications of Starfinder's setting that were really, really smart early on that have opened up more and more questions as we've gone on. Because Starfinder for a long time has been a super flexible setting. It's like, hey, here are the Pact Worlds, here's the Viscarian, here are all these other things, and you can say, heck with it, and you can just hit the drift button and fly off and go into some other planet and not care about anything else. So it's kind of it makes it really easy to put your own setting within our setting.
Do I know that?
Yeah, which is trickier trickier than what's true for like Pathfinder. Pathfinder, it's like, oh, here's the inner sea region. You can say, I want to play in Blurk, the nation that exists between, I don't know, Rahadum and Puvia. Poor Blurk. And we can say, well, that's not even on the map. What are you doing? I mean, it's your game, but it makes less sense for people. But Starfinder's just like, go wherever. It's super flexible. How long does it take to get to this place? Roll some dice. No matter what it is you're doing. Okay, well, how close is the Viscarian to the Pact World? It's near space, 3 to 6 days. There's a lot of wibbly wobbly to the setting. And that's been super cool for that flexibility purpose. What it has been trickier for has involved things like visualizing the setting. Like there are a lot of these sci-fi settings that have like the galaxy map, and you'd be like, oh, here's Hut space, here's the Alpha Quadrant, blah blah blah. But there's also like questions about some of the underlying features of our setting that have been real big question marks to a lot of the fans. And even with some of the changeover that we've had in our staff, like there are questions for us of like how exactly did this work? Does this work? Do we want it to work? What's our plan in the future for X feature? And on top of that, we looked back at a lot of our adventure paths and we sort of asked ourselves, like, especially compared to Pathfinder adventure paths, what's the basis for understanding the stakes of these? When we look at a Pathfinder adventure path like Wrath the Righteous, it's like, okay, well, if the PCs don't win, then the world wound, implodes outwards, which is, paradoxical. But it's clearly going to have ramifications on what we know and love. If we look at Attack of the Swarm, oh no, the Suskalon system has been etted. Oh no, we only have 2 billion other star systems in the galaxy. Gee shucks. Like there's a certain level of scope and consequences that having a whole galaxy to play with causes a lot of these stories to feel very localized. And it even opens up the question of, in Starfinder, like who are the antagonists? Like who's the villain here? Like, yeah, we can wander over to the Aslanti Star Empire and they can be all angry Nazi times, but like in the grand scheme of things, like what's the threat? The swarm seems to be just sort of munching off in a corner. I don't know. We don't have a galaxy map, so it's like, what's happening here? So as we started to discuss these things on our team, we're like, well, we should make some things happen. Like, let's give something that isn't just like, oh, this one star is going to explode and everybody else is going to shrug. Let's make it something that's going to have far-reaching consequences. Because if we just blow up a star, most people playing in their home games or in our adventure paths are going to say, eh. Whereas if it's something that affects the entire galaxy, suddenly it's something that anybody can be using, whether they're using their own little fragment of a home campaign setting, or whether they're playing in our more established playground. We'll have something that happen. And so we investigate, like, okay, what can we do that can affect most or all of the galaxy? And there are some ideas that we've tossed around that we sort of saved in our back pocket for possible future times. We're kind of seeing how the Drift Crisis plays out, and we can be like, have fun from there. But we wanted to play around with some sort of big event. And the Drift is so central to what the Starfinder setting is. It's going to show up in like the top 5. Like, what does the Starfinder setting involve? Things that like pretty much anybody who's read even a little bit of the book will be like, oh, the Drift is borked. Okay, that is bad. And I kind of have a sense of how and why I should care. So we basically settled pretty quickly once we started going down this rabbit hole, bucket of squirrels, whatever. We were going to mess up the Drift somehow, and that we wanted certain things to be true about how it got messed up, because even like from a narrative perspective, like various causes of a Drift crisis are going to have different impacts on the story that's told. Like, did the gods mess it up? Okay, well, this says something about the narrative and how we can or cannot fix it or address it or go in and punch it back to normal, however the heck you play your particular game. If it's some people, like mortal people who are just like, burp, we stuck a screwdriver into the cosmic outlet of the Drift and now it flipped upside down, that's bad. That also has its own narrative implication. So we basically created our kind of semi-canonical ending, but we wanted to approach the Drift Crisis in a way that supported the same flexibility that we've supported in the Starfinder setting from the beginning, which is to say, hey, here's the crisis. Here are lots of ideas of what might have caused it. And you can make whichever one of these true that you want it to be in order to tell the story that you want to tell. And in the back of the book, we will share what we are going to kind of presume is the actually behind the scenes thing that we'll kind of use for framing some of our future books. But you can kind of just adopt as much or as little of that as you particularly want. Like, you can resolve the Drift Crisis in your own way. But it's an event. It is an event that has an ending, and it is an event that will change up the Starfinder setting some, but not so much that you feel like your previous stuff is completely invalidated.
Cool. I mean, that's definitely the impression that we got from reading the book too, and it's very cool to hear about like how the thought processes went into and like what ultimately came out to be what is arguably one of the greatest setting books that has been published for a tabletop RPG. I've said that twice now. I said that in the last episode too. So I guess from there, like, how did you conceptualize that this was going to happen? Like, how did you conceptualize like the book? Not so much like the broad picture, but we're like, how did you start like building this event in this book?
Once we knew that we were doing a galaxy spanning thing,
Mm.
we knew that our standard strategies for publication were not necessarily going to be sufficient. Like when I think about doing Pathfinder Society in first edition, it was, okay, we're going to have an AP about this event. We're probably going to have a standalone module or something. There'll be 3 Pathfinder Society scenarios, and Pathfinders will have mucked up something somewhere. So, and then we'll kind of call it a day and move on. This is one where, okay, if the whole galaxy is being affected, there are millions and millions of possible stories that could be telling the events here. So we knew that just doing 1 AP or 2 APs or 2 APs plus some Starfinder Society scenarios or even a standalone adventure would not be enough. And there were so many places, so many people that we have introduced in the setting where it's like, we can't just have one of these be the Pact World side and one of these be, I don't know, but you're in the Vescarium things. We needed to provide a lot of options here. Mm-hmm. And so doing a hardcover book was going to allow us to basically present this wide array of possibilities. So you may have covered in the previous episodes, like there are 20 big adventure hooks that are basically outlining the equivalent of a standalone adventure or an adventure path, if you so desire, that are telling you the main story beats that are going into this, and as well as some places that you can vary things up, showing you some tools that you can use to put things together. But it's very little of, hey, here's this exact encounter. Here's the stat block for the thing. It's about enabling you as the GM to create a cool story based on this outline. But we needed to do that to really cover so much ground.
Yeah.
It's a lot of ground to cover, and I do really enjoy the canon ending for why it happened, because investigating the wrong answer is often as enlightening or as fun as investigating the right answer.
Definitely.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and like any catastrophe where there's not enough information, a lot of the drift crisis isn't even about resolving the drift issue itself. It's about all of the chaos that follows. Mm-hmm. And how everybody seems to have a completely different approach to understanding or taking advantage of that chaos. So like when we were, because this was a very new book, we took some time to basically prototype some of the sections to create some sample articles that we could send them to authors and say, this is what we're aiming for. So there is one where it's like, oh geez, what is that even called? But I should know better. The Apocalypse Pod. There we go. Toward the end of the Adventure Seeds, but it's basically a question of like, okay, we have a doomsday scenario that's happening. We have a setting that has a lot of doomsday cults. So if doomsday is happening and all of them are looking at each other and be like, hey, hang on, were we invited? So the Apocalypse Pod is about several of these different groups who are all basically saying, oh no, this is going to be our moment to do the thing. So you have like worshippers of Grodus who are like, it's the end times. Let's do a big old dance. Let's see about making it as fantastic an end as we can. Or there are the Kuthites who are saying, you know, if you look back far enough, we think that Zon-Kuthon might have survived into this reality by escaping reality. And has anybody else noticed the big old like escape pod that seems to be like God-sized? It's on the border of the galaxy. And any concerns here? Can we be on part of that? Or like the Devourer cult, or Cult of the Devourer, who's just like, you know, if it's the end times, let's set everything on fire. Like, we were already setting things on fire. We were already eating some corpses. Let's set everything on fire and eat all of the corpses. So it's like, it's basically what happens when you have all these not only doing their own thing, but looking at each other and saying, no, it's our apocalypse. And then they start fighting. And the adventure's premise, or the campaign's premise, is that you've been kind of stuck in terms of the drift crisis and can't necessarily get home, but are on a fairly isolated planet that is caught in the crossfire of 2 or all 3 of these. And can you survive the chaos and or even turn them against each other and even figure out what the hell is with this Kuthite pod anyway? So it's stuff like that where it's providing kind of a premise, an arc of how things could play out, and then some options of how you might consider wrapping it up as a GM.
Mhm.
But I kind of present this as a way of saying, like, hey, this one barely even has to do with drift. It's just about stuff's on fire. Who cares? And the answer is these chuckleheads.
Oh, that's good.
I love it.
We have a question from chat. Raising Rune Lords asks, Drift Crisis sounds very Warhammer 40k inspired. How much input did for Drift Crisis came from, I hope I'm saying this right, Inquisitor Hillman?
Fair. So, I mean, Thirsty was definitely part of our planning process for this. And, you know, everybody on the team at the time has their own things they have a deep background lore into. So, like, Thirsty sure does know 40K.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's kind of our alert whenever we start to veer deeply into 40K adjacent stuff, so that we can be saying, okay, this is something where we think that we can distinguish ourselves by doing this variation as opposed to exactly this thing. But like, oh no, the hyperspace realm and its terrible like warping of people as they go through it. Okay, yep. That 40K element has a little bit of overlap with the Drift Crisis, where our hyperspace realm has become more unpredictable. But we didn't really go into it being like, oh, let's make sure that we can get make sure that faster than light travel is only accessible to the Empire of Man, and you can only do it if you are in fact sacrificing a pile of psychics. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty deep in the 40K lore, and when we did the initial episode, a lot of people were bringing up comparisons, and yeah, on a surface level, some of them are similar, but it's just because there's like, you know, over 20 sci-fi plots here, and you know they're when you dig in a well, eventually you get the same water, you know.
Right.
As I think I've mentioned a couple of times before, like Starfinder Society, Thirsty and I ran into some initial difficulties coming up with the narratives because there was a reflexive, oh, but Star Trek did that from within the team. And we were kind of like paralyzed where it's like, of course Star Trek did it. Like, Star Trek has done all this plot line. What do you want from
Yeah, it's been on the ears for like
it's come up with 23 plot lines per year that Star Trek has never done. So you expand your vocabulary of sci-fi and science fantasy, and you say, okay, this is kind of similar to this thing, but let's see how we can make it Starfinder. And there's some of that to the Drift Crisis as well.
Yeah, I think especially when you get into the individual articles, there's a lot of care given to help you build out your lore for places, because you in like the Pact Worlds and other books, they give you like ideas of what regions are like, but when faced with a crisis, you get to see what things would be like, and I think that helps expand your game's prior and really helps push the setting into why these are different. Because using 40K as this example, that's all grimdark. Everything is just the worst version of whatever it is. But having these things happen in a Starfinder universe that is maybe equal parts altruism to just carnal awfulness gives you a different experience.
One of the things that tends to make Trek fans really love Deep Space Nine is like showing what happens when the Federation is in serious crisis, when it's up against the gun and it has to question its happy, high-minded ideals. And so there's an extent to which we have presented all these Pact Worlds and other realms where it's like, here's what they look like in a vacuum. And now we're just like, and now everything's covered in blood. Like, how do they respond? Oh no. Apparently they respond by Alex disappearing. So,
by just killing Alex.
But it's that sort of notion is okay. Let's see what these places are like under pressure now. And had again, the book can only be so large, so we've had to do some like, okay, this planet gets 2 paragraphs, moving on. But it's very much a fun exploration of what happens when they're under pressure, because some of them break and some of them adapt in really fun ways.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that because there's one Republic in the book that breaks, and you don't expect them to be the ones that break, and you're like, when you explain this makes sense, and I kind of like that they're the ones who break because they're also the ones who say that we would never break, and I'm like, haha, joke's on you. You probably know who I'm talking about with that description.
I think so. There are only so many that use that term.
Yeah, even Avalon, just like having something that's inherently technological go wrong, having the technological planet suddenly having to take all the backlash, whether that's earned or not, just how they respond to that. It's super interesting.
Yeah, just the Drift Crisis being an opportunity, having a player character background hook of, I am a Triunite, I am suddenly everybody's scapegoat. What do? Like, am I taking this upon myself to fix the galaxy's drift crisis problem just so that, because apparently I get to be the one who caused it, according to what's his face down the street. So like that can be loads of fun, or it could be like, you know what? I didn't know that we could mess with the drift, but now that I know, I want to go in and also tinker with it. I've never disassembled a transitive plane. Let's see what that's like. Player characters are really responsible on those things.
So speaking about characters who are almost certainly very responsible, if you were going to sit down and you were going to play a game in the Drift Crisis, what types of Drift Crisis themes would you personally want to explore? What do you think is the most like quintessential Drift Crisis PC? The hardest question I've ever asked right now.
So there are a bunch of different themes that the Drift Crisis is playing around with. So one of them is the drift itself. And we've shown how the drift incorporates bits of other planes every time it's used. And so there are already a bunch of not at all native inhabitants kind of floating through the drift, some of them happier than others. But the idea of somebody who has done a lot of stuff in the drift, has lived in the drift, was born in the drift for some ungodly reason, the idea of what happens when your home or your stomping ground is under threat could be a lot of fun. Also, I really like storylines that are going to question the presumed accessibility or travel accessibility of the setting, because when you can get anywhere in the galaxy in at most 30 days, then I mean, nothing's really blocked off, but the idea of saying, oh, suddenly reinforcements might never come because we can't trust travel anymore. Or I am stranded here now because I can't, I'm not confident in our way back, or whatever the case. I think that's a fun theme as well. So you can have these people who thought that they had a way out, or that they could just kind of be tourist adventurers, and in fact can't. And now their stakes and where they are so much larger. We're not just here for a 4-hour Starfinder society scenario. We live here now. And its problems are our problems, and its problems might have been the problems that we caused right before the Drift Crisis started, and now we have to deal with that instead of flying off. So I prefer getting a chronicle sheet rather than dealing with consequences. I don't like this at all.
Gosh, you sound like you're talking about the
Gabrani crisis.
Yeah, the Gabrani.
Yeah, geez.
Just imagine that you start that society scenario, and then Drift Crisis happens, and you're like,
oh,
quick, we've told them the truth. Hit the drift button. I said, hit the drift button. No, hit the drift button.
Violence is bad.
But that sounds fun. There's a bunch of cool options in this book too. Any of them for this theoretical character you'd want to play, that you would want to use?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I think that things like the various drift tide spellcasting options are going to be good fun. There's a drift connection for mystics. There's a drift anchor for the precog. Things like that, where whether this was something that was true about you before, or is something that has suddenly just snapped into place for you, could be a lot of fun. So the idea of, quick aside, like, part of that flexibility for using the Drift Crisis in your own games is the idea that you can basically be just dropping the Drift Crisis midstream into whatever game you're playing. And when you are talking about like a level 7 campaign at this point that you've been playing for weeks or months or whatever, saying, oh great, there's a new Mystic connection that I sure should have picked at first level, might not be the most helpful thing in the world. But if the Drift Crisis happens and suddenly your connection as a Mystic shunts over to the Drift, and now your connection's swapped out. It's like changing out your Sorcerer bloodline. All of a sudden, suddenly there's this big old personal mystery of not just why can't we travel places, but why am I getting Drift-related magic? Why do Spectras show up to deliver my spells? Like, et cetera, et cetera. So like, for me, the options that I would want to choose are the ones that are going to be really setting up an interesting, why should I care? Or what is my goal in the Drift Crisis sorts of stories.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite idea is like not knowing your GM is going to drop in the Drift Crisis, but playing a precog of the Drift Crisis and then being like, it's going to happen someday. And oh, I'm so sorry, everybody. This is my fault. My bad, y'all. We're stranded with the Gabrani, and here I am anchored to this phenomenon. Enjoy.
yeah, and because there's so many questions of what caused the Drift Crisis, that first chapter is basically set up like a player's guide for an adventure path. So it's really low on spoilers. It presents a lot of like what ifs, or the following 5 things could be true, maybe, sorts of things. But the idea of leveraging that uncertainty into your campaign as a GM is one of those truly sadistic narrative choices that hopefully you have the group that you all trust each other enough, because when the Drift Crisis starts in your game is your call. So the players are like, oh no, Obozaya got hit by a train and sure did die horribly, but that's okay. We have this, resurrection ritual. We'll just do the resurrection ritual. It'll all work out. You finish the ritual and boom, Drift Crisis happens. Keskadai's connection changes to the Drift. And everybody's like, oh no. Oh, was that us? And, everybody you run into has their own theories about what the Drift Crisis is like. Oh, I'm sure the Triunites did it, or it must be the Spectra messing around with reality, or Triune finally decided to take over the universe. And Keskadai is just sort of rocking back and forth, being like, oh, I hope they never find out. Oh, wasn't it? And whether or not you were in fact the ones who did it, or whether this was just a bad instance of timing, and you were mystically open enough at the time, like you mystically opened yourself up to the cosmos enough that your connection changed. Your call, but that can be that sort of moment that brings the PCs into not just a reflexive, oh, this is what kind of surviving, and more, oh, this is why we are now doing this thing, or this is why my class abilities changed, and I want to know why the heck we did it, not just by grabbing the GM by the shoulders and shaking them and saying, what the hell?
I love it. That's so great. I know in my home game, I added the Drift Crisis as like a consequence to like the cosmic things that are going on. And so now like everybody's just yelling all the different reasons they think the crisis is happening. And the players actually know why. And they are just sitting there like, do we tell them? We can't tell them.
They won't believe us.
No, they won't believe us. Good stuff. I think that is the most fun, because you give them that information and they can't use it. It's like, what are you gonna do with that? Go on, tell the news media, do it. I dare you. And they're like, we don't like the way you said that, Alex. We're not gonna tell them anything. I'm like, no, tell them, please.
No,
go ahead. No.
Okay, you have now convinced this group to help you because they think that you might be the key to all of this. In other news, the lounge downtime activity is no longer available because you will never again know peace.
You will never again, indeed. I love talking about this book. This book is so much fun to talk about. You mentioned before when we were talking that there's a whole bunch of creepy crawlies in this book. Do you have a favorite creepy crawly?
Sure do. The Undershrike. So Absalom Station, because Absalom Station has always had this interesting tie to the drift, because it's like a super drift beacon in a way. There's a certain level of travel stability that Absalom Station still has during the drift crisis. And so one of the things that means is that people say, well, at least Absalom Station isn't on fire. Let's go there. And Absalom Station is built to handle a certain population and not more. And so there are a couple of different adventure hooks in here that are tied into what's happening with Absalom Station. And are you basically like trying to resolve some things on a much bigger scale, like the supernatural scale, like how can we leverage Absalom Station's weird magic stuff? Or are you dealing with kind of a street level thing of like, how can we help some of the refugees here? How can we become community leaders to resolve these street level concerns, as opposed to solving the drift crisis? And one of those adventure hooks really takes you into the ghost levels, which are these nebulously large section of Absalom Station that is basically, we don't go there, it's haunted. And so Absalom Station authorities start to ask, like, well, what if we sent in people who are good at getting rid of haunted things, and that way we could free up some more space and we can put some of these people here and we can basically expand Absalom Station. We should have done this like 300 years ago, but we didn't. We organized. Fortunately, we have player characters now, and they work for peanuts.
It's true.
So it was an opportunity to really look into the ghost levels a whole bunch, and so there's some fun information in there about exploring the ghost levels that leave open a lot of space for you as a storyteller to add in your own stuff. But one of the things was like, what things do haunt this place? And the undershrikes are one of them. There's kind of some theories in their article about like where did these come from anyway? Such as like these were people who were living down here during the gap, and when the gap ended, they didn't quite come out of the gap as they used to be. And so it's like, are people kind of trapped in these undershrike beings? And a piece of lore that's in there is that each one of them seems to speak a completely different language. As far as observers are able to tell, there don't seem to be any two undershrikes that speak the same language, and yet they can all understand each other. And I feel this kind of creates these interesting moments of players overhearing or perceiving these creatures interacting in a way that causes players just to look at each other with side eye and be like, I don't know that this is actually where we want to be, where it's like, we can only understand one of these three creatures who are talking to each other or past each other, and we don't like what the one is saying or how it's responding to the others, and we don't know what the other two are saying. But we have exactly enough information to be really scared and nope, right out of here. So I just find them fun and creepy and atmospheric, which is really what you need the ghost levels to be.
I do like fun, creepy, and atmospheric. It is my thing. Very cool. Dustin, I know that you weren't with us last time we did it. Do you have a favorite creature in this book? Something you want to tell John all about, how much you love it?
Does Dustin have a favorite creature in this book?
Give him a friendly hit of dopamine on these trying times.
Oh, well, I mean, the first thing that got me when I was just zipping through the creatures here was probably, I'll put it up here in art, the sky sail. The art was fantastic for it. And I have a thing for plants that drain intelligence. I don't know why. Alex knows why, but I don't know why.
That's a very specific kink to have.
No, it's I like these kind of like I could see this in a traditional fantasy, but I love seeing it in a science fantasy, and they're really cool. I'm a big fan of like pets, former zoo pets, rich people buying these monsters they definitely shouldn't have. So I do like seeing that, and you have to imagine during a big crisis like this, that's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like when we could import things for the intelligence-eating plant to eat that were humane or sustainable, that was fine. Now we don't. And now, for lack of gerbils to feed to our collection of boa constrictors, the snakes are angry, and they are escape artists, and they have found a way out. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Definitely.
What about you, Alex? Anything you like?
Oh my gosh. I mean, well, first of all, last week we talked about the protomanders, and just the idea of fusing hated enemies with a being of primordial chaos is amazing to me, and I love it. You know what one I really like that I didn't expect that I was really going to like? I really like the art for the Rift Stalker. There's just something really cool and mystic and magical about a green glowy wolf thing. Like, I don't know if they're all green glowy wolf things, but I'm okay with that specific Drift Stalker. Also, the Umduveng is awesome because he basically looks like Jumbo Jukiba from Lilo of Stitch if he had an extra pair of hands. So that's good. That's good by me.
Disney gets everywhere, man. So much
It's
mileage.
Yeah, I mean, the Rift Stalkers can basically look like a wide variety of different creatures depending upon what plane or what rift it is that they're hanging nearby. So I think this one I ordered as specifically to try and be like an Elysium Chaotic Good Rift Stalker.
Nice.
So it's just like give me kind of a planty, naturey, glowy wolf thing. And I'm like, all right, good. Yep, happy with what we got here.
It's wonderful. Definitely to the point where someday, Rift Stalker creature companions would be really cool. It'd be great. Give me, please.
Weren't we just talking about irresponsible pet ownership?
Yes, we were absolutely talking about irresponsible pet ownership.
Weren't we just talking about player characters doing things and then realizing that they'd started galaxy-wide catastrophes?
You know what? I'm willing to take the risk for a good extraplanar doggo. Man, so wow, I just getting to hear a lot about how the work that goes into this book is so fun and interesting. So like, I guess on another handle, are these topics that you like, these adventures that you have in this book, are they things that the Starfinder team would consider like developing into full modules or adventures, or are they things that are better served as like, here are things for you to do what you want with GM?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So like a couple of these adventure seeds are ones that we have published adventures that are coming out that touch on them or are kind of exploring them in one way. But each of these adventure seeds, even if we have an adventure path that riffs off of it, allow a lot of flexibility of how you want to tell that story. So which is the one that I'm looking for? Like not trifold response. Decoding the Storm, for example, is one where it's like, okay, we have some adventure material that's coming out that's touching on those themes. And you might even be able to compare them side by side and say, okay, we can see where one informed the other. But they're written by separate people. They're developed with the knowledge of what each one is trying to do, but they're kind of distinct in their own way. So if you want to play with the adventure path, fantastic. You might get some fun insights of other stuff to add in by looking at that adventure seed. You just want to take the adventure seed and run with it. Also great.
I do have a question about the adventure paths and the interjections. I noticed there's not one for Horizons of the Vast. Is that one just by like timing, it just didn't come out, or just didn't seem appropriate? Or
I think that was one where I think that was just at the end of our cutoff, because we had all of Fly Free or Die available when we were getting the stuff written up. But Horizons of the Vast was still kind of on its own. The other thing is that like as far as adventure paths that could benefit most from the Drift Crisis, there's an extent to which Horizons of the Vast is kind of self-contained. And if you just wanted to play it in its own little not Kingmaker bubble, you totally could. Granted, there are other ways that the Drift Crisis would affect it, like, oh no, now we can't really get colonists in, or now we can't get resources and contributions in. I think that folks will find that the combination of all the different ways that the Drift Crisis is affecting places, as well as these samples of like how previous adventure paths could be adjusted with the Drift Crisis in mind, should be able to help folks imagine how some of our upcoming adventure paths could also be tweaked and adjusted depending upon those factors.
Yeah, I looked at that. I think they have the same release date, the final volume of the AP in this. So yeah, I was thinking it was initially just timing.
Yeah.
Definitely makes sense. I noticed there's an entire like spread on secret treasures. What goes into making secret treasures for the Drift Crisis?
Let's see. This is one of the sections that I did not work on directly, but
I've done it. I've stumped John Compton. I will take my gold star now.
we found out that he didn't work on every single part of the book.
Oh my gosh! There's 4 pages he doesn't know anything about.
One of the elements of the Drift Crisis is the Drift Crash, which is the moment the Drift Crisis really just triggers. The Drift Crash is what like disappears some of the starships that are in the drift. It's what vomits several of the others into completely unrelated places with no particular way home. And the Drift Crisis, or the Drift, pulls in planar material, but we also have an adventure seed that is, what if it's just started going in reverse? The Spaceballs equivalent of going from suck to blow. I know, nice comparison. So the Drift Crisis treasure table, in addition to just providing a whole bunch of weird, like, whoa, what's the story behind this thing that you could find, is also the possibility of stuff that has been drift in reversed. So like, wow, Starship sure did get hucked into the side of Akaton, and it had several of these things survived. What was the story behind the starship? What happened? Why are there no bodies, even though it's implied that this should have had like 1,000 people on board? Can any of the things on here kind of give us a clue of how to investigate and find out where those people went and got Bermuda Triangled? But it's also kind of the classic conundrum, especially in a science fantasy setting, where it's like, okay, fantasy setting, we can be like, you find a topaz and 3 gold bars, you'll be happy.
Right.
Or it's a curved wooden statue with ruby eyes, and go be looters. But science fantasy setting doesn't always have that same degree of like intuitive treasure. Mm-hmm. And so the Drift Crisis treasure is also a possibility, a way for us to present different treasures of different value ranges, to say, okay, you need something random that's about 5,000 credit, or could be potentially worth 5,000 credits. Here's stuff that you can roll on a D20 table and find some cool things that make the players perk up and be like, we could sell this, but why? So in addition to all the adventure hooks that we already give you, really these treasure tables are their own set of different storylines just waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just stuff that you find that isn't meant to be treasure or meant to be notable as treasure is so good in games. I've had so many games where we've just kept art. I think I kept the couch once because it was comfortable. Like, if you just give players the ability to find fun stuff, they'll just do dumb stuff with it, which is great.
Do you remember that time that you wanted us to keep the entire closet full of like fine china?
but every single one is its own little way for either players to become fixated, like closet full of china, or for them to say, oh, hang on, heck with solving the Drift Crisis. We're going to do X now. So like results 17 and 18 on the 5,000 credits treasure table. A 200-year-old bottle of Queen's Best Choice, a prestigious Shirin wine from a now defunct winery, a holographic message projector containing a note saying, bring this when you change your mind about our joint venture, and a set of stellar coordinates in the vast. And it's just like, players are going to read that and be like, we don't care about the Drift Crisis anymore. We're going, 200 years ago, don't care. There's a joint business venture, and maybe the Shirin winery is full of like wine liches now, and they're still interested. And they're like, that's strange. We don't remember you having a mustache. And you say, it's been 200 years. Of course, I've had time to grow it out. We could have the computer skill, but all we have is bluff.
I love the complete collection of Batlin Banthrid wind-up toys, all still in the original packaging. Some of them signed by the original actors.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Yeah, no, I wanted to call attention to those treasures because they're hilarious. There's not a single one that I don't adore. I would not let James sell any of them, and then I would be outvoted and be very sad when they all got sold.
Well, take that, you stupid smart chicken.
I mean, you can just imagine like the Raxolite who gets a hovering throne decorated in Baroque ornamentation sized for a tiny creature and made of translucent glittering metallic material. It's worth 25,000 credits, and we're level 5 and you don't have nearly that much, but I'm sure that you're going to be paying off for 3 levels. You could have upgraded your weapon, but you got a throne. Throne.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would just take the throne. Yeah.
The Raxolite 6 in it is like, you're going to have to sell me with the throne. Okay, see ya.
Bye, little guy.
But Jimmy, we need you to fine. Your Highness, we need you to rock and roll initiative.
That's so funny. Very good. So we're coming pretty close to time. We've gone for about 45 minutes now. Is there anything about Drift Crisis that we haven't talked about that you really want to share with the world? A favorite thing, a special place deep inside your heart that you're like, everybody, you need to know all about this thing.
Oh boy. Yeah. So one of the other elements, like going back to the very beginning of this episode where I was talking about how like who's near whom, does it matter? We have all these big organizations, they barely seem to talk to each other. The Drift Crisis has been an opportunity for us to challenge some of that isolation or that apparent isolation. And so one of the locations that we got for this one is a planet called Atuity, or Kataria, which has a city called Atuity on it. And the Drift Crash basically throws a Veskarium warship out into the orbit of this Aslanti colony, and leaves several hundred Vesk, several hundred like Aslanti, troop. We don't expect to really do anything here, low-level soldiers, and everybody can't really talk to their home worlds at all. And so there's just this standoff. But that Atuity seems to have this interesting functionality where like it seems to be defined the Drift Crisis in some way that you can explore in the course of the campaign. And so Atuity is really this opportunity for us to start mashing together several of these big possible antagonists that haven't had a reason to deal with each other, but now are kind of getting thrown up into each other's business. So the Drift Crisis is a great opportunity for us to build that tension between the Aslanti Star Empire and the Veskarium for whatever future shenanigans happen, as well as several other of these interactions and points. So I definitely recommend that's going to be the Beacons of War Adventure Seed is a really fun one because not only do you have the Aslanti and the Veskarium happening there, but you have the people, these like Aslanti inhabitants and colonists, where it's like, if the Aslanti Star Empire were to have any place where you look at it and you're like, that actually doesn't feel like it's living in the shadow of a horrible, horrible, dehumanizing tyranny. Kataria is one of those places. And so it's like, what do the inhabitants think about it? And so you as the player characters have these 3 different factions that you're kind of playing off of each other or taking sides of, or figuring out what the future is of this. And it's like, is this going to presage war? Is this going to become an independent thing of its own right? So it's like these moments of isolation that are speaking to possible future storylines that make the galaxy seem more connected than before are really exciting to me. Because as much as I love for you to be able to disappear into that random corner of the galaxy, I really want the galaxy to feel like it is a cohesive whole more and more.
Nice. Very
Awesome.
cool. Well, we're looking at 9:50 right now. James and Dustin, do you guys have anything about Drift Crisis you want to share with the world that we haven't gotten to talk about yet?
That we haven't gotten to talk about.
No.
Not in particular. I mean, in general, the book is just great and it opens up a lot of your understanding. It is the weirdest like formatted book, and it might take you a little bit to read if you're looking for a thing, because you just get everything when it matters for what it is. So it does take a little while, but it does help kind of bridge your gaps in knowledge, whether that is from you not reading other things or just not having things interact with each other, like the Veskarium and the Aslanti Star Empire, both warlike areas, so
nice.
Yeah. And this is definitely an experiment on our part. And so if we look at how things go and we say, wow, that really worked out well, it might be that we give some time to cool off, and then we consider, hey, is there another event that we might want to do in the future that has a similar kind of approach? Because it could be loads of fun. And we certainly have several of the ideas that are on the cutting room floor that are only on the cutting room floor because Drift Crisis was a title that jumped out to us, and we're like, oh yeah, we can do stuff with that. Save the others for another day.
Well, we're certainly excited to see what's coming out on those other days. Dustin, did you have anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I want to throw up a picture of Zoe.
Zoe is great. I know. I really appreciate how many of like the major characters from like Adventure Paths and Starfinder like appear in this book. Like Zoe here, look at him.
Right. Yeah, I do love the opportunity to see how in one cohesive place, how everything's been progressing with all these NPCs and all these worlds that I got familiar with through like Starfinder Society. And it comes off, it's great for that. It's awesome for that. It's like it reminds me very much of kind of the Lost Omens books when Tui first came out, reading up on, okay, this is what happened by canon in all these APs. This is where everything's headed now. All right, this gives me a good beacon to know where to go from here if I want to participate in with the same kind of setting everybody else is involved with. And I can't wait to get together at conventions and tell people what my character did during the Drift Crisis.
So here's a question that's going to be a weird one. Typically when like APs come out, I know, weird question, it's my specialty. Typically when APs come out, like the general rule is that they like on the timeline they happen the year they're released. Do you have a canon year that the Drift Crisis happens, or is it not going to be considered for like an actual canon answer for that?
I think that just as how toward the end of this book we have what the presumed canonical cause and outcome of the Drift Crisis are, in the same way there's kind of a presumed or presumption that like during this 2-year period is when the Drift Crisis is happening before it kind of gets wrapped up. Nice. But just like how we provide the flexibility of the causes and effects, the flexibility of where you're telling the stories, if you want to be presenting the Drift Crisis, a couple of years earlier, a couple of years later, that's not going to change anything. So it's there to be used as you want to use it. It's an opportunity for us to not only be providing for a lot of our published adventure content, but a recognition that a lot of the gaming that's happening in Starfinder is homebrew, is campaigns of your own creation. So let's provide you these tools without judgment that you can be using to create those stories that you want to be telling.
That's cool, because in my campaign, the Devourer definitely ate Triune, and that's what.
Oh, definitely.
Definitely.
Well, that would cause a Drift Crisis.
Well, thanks so much for joining us for No Direction Beyond, John, and thanks to everybody who watched us live. We're live once a month on Wednesdays. The best way to figure out when we're going, because quite frankly, like the Drift Crisis, you can never really be sure when we're going live. So the best way to find out is by hopping onto our Discord. You can find the link at nodirectionpodcast.com, and we are a super cool and chill community that talks all about Pathfinder 1st and 2nd edition, Starfinder, and now the Essence 20 games. Do you want to throw a link to that? Yeah, you did. Oh, you guys are great. I love you both. So any shout outs anybody wants to make before we sign out?
Nope, I'm good.
No. Dustin has a book that came out on Starfinder Infinite. It is a Galactic Magic's Secret Feat chapter. He did it with Owen and Salatra Harving. So you should no, I said that wrong.
Sasha Lara Nora Harving.
Yes. So if you want to check that out, you totally should. Starfinder Infinite is super cool. You support Paizo and you support Dustin and you support Owen. You literally can't lose. So thanks for joining us on No Direction Beyond. And until next time, go beyond with No Direction.